Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I've been here before. The last time I was here, I talked about the Ukraine. I had just come back from an OSCE mission monitoring their elections. This time I've just come back from a Fulbright. I was teaching in the Ukraine this last fall, and I was thinking I would talk to you about what's going on there up on the front, and I was helping to train military prosecutors and try to turn those prosecutors into what we would call JAG lawyers so they could give commanders advice in the field. Right now that's done from Kiev, and their defense ministry provides civilian lawyers, and of course the commander in the field has to wait for his legal advice, and it doesn't work. So that was an interesting experience. But I decided instead I might talk to you about a book I'm working on that may be of a bit wider interest, but you can ask questions about the Ukraine afterwards. And I've got 20 minutes? 15 minutes? 20 minutes, okay. I started adult life out as a history major and anthropology minor at the University of Illinois, and went on active duty as an armor officer after a year of law school, being called out for the Big Tet offensive in '68, and decided, because of some things that happened to me on active duty the first time, I was interested in foreign affairs and wanted to do that. Well, when I returned home, I finished law school, I get a PhD in public policy analysis and concentrate on national security affairs. And the way we train people in national security affairs, and how I ended up at the postgraduate school in the War College, is we look at either one of two avenues of approach. One, we train area specialists who become particularly expert on a certain country, a certain region of the world. They learn to speak German or French. They spend some time in that particular country. They study the literature, the people, the sociology, the culture of the country, and they become very, very knowledgeable about that, and they can advise the commander, if they're on the staff in the field, of the National Command Authority, if they end up in Washington, on how people in those places react. The other way we train national security people is principally around conflicts analysis. So they study political science, they look at treaties, they understand relationships, and particularly now we like to study alliances. And most often we study NATO, which in my opinion is a mistake. NATO, and we won't talk about the last month, NATO works so well, it is not a good example of an alliance. Reading what Pershing had to say about Europe 100 years ago, or reading what Eisenhower had to say about being Supreme Allied Commander Europe 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 75 years ago in Europe, might be a lot more valuable than studying NATO today, looking at CENTO, CETO, and what happens there and the things that have gone wrong. Well, what I'm writing about in the book is a new understanding of international affairs. What sort of thing do we send off young PhD students, what we want them to read, how they're going to look at the world, so that they don't end up doing what I did as a young man. Somebody gives me a mission, I go out with that mission in my hand, and I say to my counterpart on the other side, to a village chief, to a district representative, to a general in an allied army, I've got this mission to work with you doing a certain sort of thing. I'd like to see your Manning chart so I can talk to your 3 about operations, your 2 about intelligence, your 4 about supply, your 5 about command and signal, your 6 about civil affairs, your 7 about money. I'd like to do all of those things. And of course they say yes, they give me the Manning chart. Then at the end of the conversation, when they've accepted the mission, I tell them, and by the way, the ambassador has given me a bag of money so we can execute this. Immediately, the hand goes out, I am stopped, and he says, oh, money, my nephew will take care of that. Now, if you don't understand what has just happened to you culturally, you are not going to be successful. That other people don't do things the way we do them. They may have the Manning chart, but that's not how they operate. A foreign affairs, foreign specialty officer, student of mine, about 20 years ago, he's a specialist in South America, had this wonderful story. And what it was is he was attached to a battalion, I believe in Chile, and there was a flood. The battalion commander, they're organized just like our infantry. They have a headquarters company, they have 3 line companies, they have support and supply that come down from regiment to support them. But when there's this flood, the battalion commander goes not to his headquarters, not to his staff, but he goes down to a lieutenant who is from the area where he is from, where the flood is, and he says, I want you to get some engineering equipment, we need some boats and supplies to get out to these people who have trouble. It's your home area, you do that. And by the way, you can take anybody from the battalion you want, wherever they're assigned, who comes from the same area, speaks the local dialect. So while they're organized the way we are, we don't send A company out with this mission or B company out. We send the people that we think are most attuned to that particular area because that's how they work. So we gave them the structure. We said, this is how we want you to organize. Here's your TO&E. You've got this table of organization and equipment, and we want you to function this way. Well, they do that on paper, and of course we pay for some of this, right? So we want them to do this, we exercise this, we put this into their command and staff schools, but this isn't how it works. Well, where am I going with this, and what do I want to change? Where do I want these new PhD students, the new War College and command and staff students, where do I want them to learn, and how do I want them to think about the rest of the world? I think there are four forces that hold the modern world together. There are four major ones. There are lots of things that you have to learn about areas. You need to know the language, you need to know the culture, you need to read their poetry to understand who these people are and how they make decisions. You need to know what their history is and where they come from, how they do things. But if you don't understand these four forces, I don't think you can be successful in your interoperability if they're allies, in your planning if they're adversaries, in the way we spend money to look at how we operate in the world strategically. The four forces are fundamentalism, tribalism, nationalism, and globalism. Now I'm going to give you my definitions of those. The first and the most important, and the way the rest of the world is organized, is tribalism. There is a basic belief that if people look like you, they talk like you, they think like you, they have a common history, a common religious background, a common basis, they are genetically related on a very close basis, it is in your interest to operate or interoperate with them. You will be better taken care of and you can be more effective and more functional. That is how the rest of the world operates. That's how it works in Asia, that's how it works in Africa, that's how it works in South America. That's not how it works in Europe generally, that's not how it works in the United States generally, and we tend to think everybody else has gone through the Enlightenment. They read Voltaire and Rousseau and Montesquieu, and they're coming to another conclusion. They're not. This is how most of the world operates, and if you don't understand it, you won't be able to effectively interact with these people. The second major force is counter to that, and that's nationalism. That's where you understand that people who share a larger geographical area with you, if you're able to interoperate with them and work better, you can achieve more. Think the American Revolution. The 13 colonies were actually very, very different. Georgia was a penal colony, and as far as I'm concerned, we probably should have left it that way, but that's another issue. Pennsylvania was organized on a money model. This was a private corporation because someone very close to the king, the Penn family, was able to receive a monopoly on how to operate in this particular area. And each of the other colonies had their own unique, Calvert in Maryland, Lord Baltimore, it was for Catholics because we had this problem, of course, in the 1660s with a revolution in England that divided English-speaking people up according to religious lines. If we think about the Second Amendment, for example, all of that comes out of the English Civil War, and they refer to our revolution as the Second Civil War, by the way, in terms of if we're going to look at English-speaking people down through history and how we see each other. Well, the colonies decided that since the common enemy was the usurpation of freedom by Britain, by the British royal family in particular, that they didn't have representation in Parliament. We weren't able to secure our own laws. We weren't able to appoint or elect our own governors. We had some states, some colonies had legislatures, most notably Virginia with the House of Delegates, and of course the Bill of Rights done by Jefferson as a young member of the House of Delegates. He copied when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and his student James Madison wrote into the Constitution. We were able to get together with this force of nationalism, this greater good from the larger body, and come together with a sense of commonality. And remember, it didn't work completely, because 80 years later we fought the Civil War over issues that were unfinished, and not just slavery, but lots of other things that were unfinished in the Constitution. It wasn't a full and complete document. The third force I'd like you to recognize, fundamentalism, is the operation of myth within the culture of a society. And every society has it. I spent 7 years in Nevada. And Nevadans think of themselves as cowboys. They're rugged individualists. You know, they wear 10-gallon hats. They wear cowboy boots. They're different from other Americans. Well, when you tell them, look at the statistics. You are the most urbanized state in the Union. 95% of the people in Nevada live in 2 counties. They live in Clark County in the south. They live in Washoe County in the north. The rest of Nevada, there are no people out there. Nevada is the most biologically diverse state in the Union, believe it or not. Dry, desert, that's what you think of Nevada. There are mountain ranges in Nevada with 3 mountains. Some of these are above 7,000 feet, so there's no principal groundwater transference from one mountain range to the other. So there are things that have been there since the late Pleistocene that are growing. The oldest living things on Earth are in those hills, the bristlecone pine, because they are separated by these desert expanses since the Salton Sea retreated. Well, their myth of being rugged individualists, it isn't true. They're urbanites. They're more urban than New Yorkers. More people live in country areas than New York. So understanding the myth of who you are is extremely important. The fundamentalism, as I defined it, for looking at foreign affairs and looking at a people, a group of people, if you want to analyze them, is that there is a belief in every cultural society that there was a golden age, a perfect time, in which if those values that were prevalent at that time were brought back to the fore, the society would be successful. For us, it's the Gilded Age. It's the 1880s. You know, the Civil War is over. We've industrialized. I'm working on a humanities program dealing with the West in Tulsa, which I've just flown in from. And there were 3 Native Americans who were part of the speakers group who talk about the buffalo. So when I say economically, you have to consider the buffalo this way. Power in 1880 to get the Industrial Revolution going in America comes from steam and water. We were just beginning to start using coal in a heavy way. Obviously, the locomotives, but also, you know, creating power so that we could create the Industrial Revolution. The way the Industrial Revolution got power from water or coal or wood to a machine, to a lathe, a line of instrumentalities that you could make something, was using leather from the bison that were killed. So we weren't just killing the buffalo to destroy the commissary for Indians. We needed the leather so that we could support the Industrial Revolution. So from an economic point of view, this is why this happened. Our myth is that the buffalo were killed because, you know, we wanted to do away with the Indians and it was sport and all those sorts of things. It's myth. It's not the reality. We have to look at what the reality was to understand. Pliny writes late in the Roman Empire that the values of the Roman Republic had been lost. People were honest, they were patriots, they were dedicated to the country. We had the spirit of the Cincinnati, that is the amateur politician who would serve the state and then go back to his plow later. Once you do away with that, with an imperial form of government, you don't have this participation in the democratic process. You lose the basic values that made Rome great. That was their myth. Well, all of the expansion of Rome came, the great expansion of Rome, you know, all the way across Europe into Asia Minor, after Rome became an empire. Because when you seize power and you put it in the hands of the Capitoline, these 20 families that ran Rome, you then could push the Roman borders out because they were interested in making money. This was about making money. That's what it was about. So, you know, they had their myth too. They had their myth too. So understanding fundamentalism is a place in time and space in which the society's values were exercised in a manner that for that society things were perfect. Things worked. They were able to grow. They were able to become strong and powerful. You need to understand that every society has that, and you need to know what it is from the places you were you're dealing with. And the fourth, globalism, and you're all familiar with this coming from any large organization. My concept of globalism is that ideas, good ideas, have no boundary in politics, no boundary in geography, and no boundary in intellectual philosophy. Think. You are in Los Angeles. You work for a government agency. A friend of yours hears a joke at breakfast. When he gets to work, by noon, people are telling the joke in your office. By 4 o'clock, the joke is almost old. If it's a good idea, it gets around. It doesn't have boundaries. I spend way too much time traveling. I can tell you that if you like sporting goods, you need to get to Cheyenne by 4 o'clock on Sunday, by 5 o'clock during the week, so that you can hit Sierra Trading Post and hit the sale barn in the back of the store. I mean, I know things like truck drivers. If you like White Castle hamburgers, the furthest west White Castle goes is Kansas City, and on the exchange of the ring road around 80, on the northwest corner is the last White Castles in the United States. There are none further west than that. So you would think I was a truck driver. I spend way too much time on the road. But one of the things about traveling, when you are out and about in different places, you see how people live, and you make an attempt to understand how they make decisions and what they do. The way they eat, the way they talk, the way they worship, all of those things are part of what constitutes their collectiveness in terms of who they are. But anyway, this globalism, where it goes. If you drive across northern Illinois on Interstate 80 and you are approaching the Iowa border, you are in what I would affectionately call John Deere country. That's where John Deeres are made. But if you look out in the field, you see these red Kubota Korean tractors because they are lighter, they are stronger, they are cheaper, they are more efficient, they burn less fuel. That's globalism. A good idea will not be bound in today's interconnected world. Anyway, that's 15 minutes? 20 minutes?
Very good.
Any questions about that? Anyway, I'm in the middle of the book. I've been working on that for a while, and I'd like to push that. Yes, sir.
The other side of globalism, though, is that bad ideas also travel the world.
Absolutely.
Communism.
Absolutely.
Question?
Repeat the question. Bad ideas.
Oh, bad ideas also travel. Bad ideas also travel.
Like communism, he said.
Like communism. Like communism. Yes, sir.
Am I wrong assuming that you concur with Trump's analysis of NATO?
Oh, I do not concur with Trump's analysis of NATO. And I'll tell you why, very simply. At all of the war colleges, the Air Force in Montgomery, the Navy in Newport, the Army in Carlisle, and of course the National Defense University in Washington, we have missed the boat. In front of each of those institutions, there should be a statue of a man named Fox Connor. This was General Pershing's brains. This was the G3 for the American Expeditionary Force in 1917. This is the man who won the First World War for us. In addition to that, you know him for other means. He discovers Eisenhower. Eisenhower is his executive officer in Panama who doesn't read very much. He gives them literally a course in history. Ike is there as a geographical bachelor. He is a bridge player. Connor was an excellent bridge player, so he plays with Eisenhower and a number of the other officers and their wives there, and then discusses history with him. He was a student of history. He discovers Marshall. He's the one who brought Marshall in as an assistant in the operations planning in the Expeditionary Force in Europe. He discovers Patton. In fact, he introduces Patton to Marshall at a breakfast at his house in the 1920s in Washington, D.C. Before he dies, and the reason why you don't know about him, he served from 1898 till 1938. So he retires before the Second World War, so he doesn't get command of a corps or a field army. He's not in the field and known. But this is what he said that ought to be underneath the statue that are at all those places. Never fight unless you have to. Never fight for long. Never fight alone. If you violate any of those principles in war, you will eventually lose.